Welcome to the 21st Century Business Forum. I'm your host, Jon Gordon. And today my guest is Nick Saban. Nick is the head coach of the University of Alabama football team. He's a 7-time winning national champion coach. Incredible. 7 championships. One of the greatest coaches of all time. In this interview, he shares his wisdom and insights for leadership, culture, and building winning teams, and how that translates to business, sports, and life. Coach, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
Doing great. Great to talk to you. So people always ask me this question, and I want to ask it of you. Do the same principles apply for leadership and business in terms of leadership, culture, and teamwork?
Well, I think so. I think that, to be successful in whatever you choose to do is probably pretty similar. I think culture is the most important thing. I think mindset is a very important part of culture. Obviously, whatever your business is, you have to define the culture. But, to get people to have a vision for what they want to accomplish and what they want to do, to get them to understand, here's the things that you have to do to accomplish that. Here's how you have to edit your behavior to be able to do it. And then having the discipline to execute it every day is probably, it's important to being successful in anything that you do. And I think the hardest thing for most folks is the discipline piece. We always, if you played athletics somewhere along the line, you saw some sign that says disciplines do what you're supposed to do, when you're supposed to do it, the way it's supposed to get done, do the right thing, the right way, the right time, all the time. But self-discipline is really more about, we make hundreds of decisions every day that really come down to 2 questions. Here's something I know I'm supposed to do that I really don't want to do. Can you make yourself do it? And then here's something I know I'm not supposed to do, but I want to do it. Can you keep yourself from it? Well, to me, if you can make those choices and decisions the right way, you're always going to be able to stay on the path of doing the things you need to do to accomplish the goals that you have. So kind of comes down to feeling versus choice. You hear it in your business. I hear it in our business. I don't feel like practicing today. I don't feel like going to class. It's not about what you feel like doing. And you got to choose to do the things you need to do to accomplish the goals that you have. So I think the mindset, the culture, what it takes to be successful in business or in football or in any sport is probably very similar.
As a leader, how do you get your team to be more disciplined? Because we know that it has to come from within, and yet as a leader, you want to ignite that. So what role does the leader play, and how can you do that?
I think, first of all, people don't understand what leadership is sometimes. First thing about leadership to me is you really have to be somebody that somebody wants to emulate. So to be a leader, you have to set an example. You have to do things the right way yourself. And I think a lot of times people would rather not choose to sort of do that because it requires a commitment on their part. The second part of leadership is you have to be willing to help other people for their benefit, not for your benefit. That's manipulation, for their benefit, which, I think the power of one is really important when it comes to leadership. Most people think leadership is I'm going to stand up in front of the group and I'm going to give this great speech, and that's being a leader. Well, really, you're trying to influence people on a daily basis to do things that would allow them to be successful or to buy into the culture better. And it really happens more on a one-to-one basis. Especially in football. If you have a good leader at every position, he can impact every player at his position. Just like if you have good leadership in every part of your business, they can influence the individuals, in their part, because the individuals make the team what it is. So, I think you have to be willing to serve other people if you're going to be a good leader. I think that's really, really important. And I don't think it's really any different in business. I think one of the things that, I always struggle with a little bit is we live in such an outcome-oriented world. People want to focus on outcomes. And I think outcomes are a bit of a distraction. I think if you could focus on the process, like, what do I have to do to get the outcome? I think we're all a lot better off. And I think in a leadership position, rather than just talking about the outcome, we want to sell this much stuff, or, we want to win this many games. Those are all outcomes. I mean, the thing you want to lead in is, okay, what do we have to do to get the outcome? So I want to get all the individuals in the organization to do the things that is going to help them be able to get the outcome that we want to achieve. It's like around here, we don't have any signs up in the building that says win the national championship. We don't have any signs up that says win the SEC. We do have a sign that says be a champion. And if we can get this kind of behavior, whether it's togetherness, whether it's being positive, whether it's being responsible for your own self-determination when it comes to doing your job, whether it's work ethic, perseverance, overcoming adversity, pride and performance, all these things. If we can get all these things to a certain level, then our team is going to have a really good chance of winning a championship. So the emphasis is always on what do you have to do to get the outcome.
I love that you said that, because my next question was going to be about the process. And so you've been talking about the process for years, and now everyone talks about the process, and you are known for that. So what is the process? Like, how does the process lead to the results? Can you define process?
Process is very simply the things that you have to do to get the outcome that you want. So whether you set a goal or you have a vision for what you want your business to be, now you got to sit down and define, this is what we have to do to do it. This is what we have to do it. And to me, that's the process. And that's really what you want people to be focused on. Do all these little things that are going to lead to the outcome, not, I got to sell 10 cars this month. Well, basically, what do you have to do to sell 10 cars? And if you'd focus on that, you probably will sell them. But that's basically what the process is. It's a definition of what you have to do to accomplish the goal that you have.
When you begin a season, a training camp, do you tell each player what the process is? Do you spell it out and lay it out for them?
Well, I think everything that we do is about process. I mean, I don't think there's a difference between outcomes and process. Like if I ask a player, what's your goal as a player? And he plays wide receiver and he tells me he want to catch 50 passes. I say that's an outcome. That's not really a goal. I'd rather you define the goal of, I want to be a complete player at my position. I want to run, really good routes. I want to play with toughness. I want to block. I want to do the things that I need to do to catch 50 passes. But our whole organization is set up that way. I mean, we don't even talk about winning a game. All right, we talk about more dominate your box. What do you have to do to win your box? Well, if everybody wins their box, we're going to win the game. All right, that's going to be that's going to be what happens because we all did what we thought we needed to do to have success. So so culturally, everything in the organization is about what do I have to do personally, academically, and athletically to have success in all those areas. And then we define it and we have structure, because I think where we make lots of mistakes is sometimes we don't define expectations enough. So people really don't know what's expected of them. And you say, well, do your job. Well, what is my job? Well, let me define that. I think that's the thing I learned from Belichick. He defined the expectation for everybody in the organization, for everything in the organization, what kind of players we wanted to bring to the team, what kind of critical factors we had at every position, what their size needed to be, their speed needed to be, what the character and intelligence we thought they needed to have to play that position. So, I mean, everything was defined. I think the simple example that I give a lot is if you go to our lake house, we'll have 7 bottles of ketchup and no mustard, because Miss Terry never takes a list to the store. All right. So she just buys stuff, ketchup looks good. I'll get a bottle of ketchup. We don't need any ketchup. So, but if you define exactly what you want, exactly what you're looking for, exactly what your expectation is, then you're not going to end up in that circumstance. And you're going to be able to satisfy the needs of the organization. You're going to be able to satisfy the needs at the the person has to have to succeed in that role. So they're probably going to be happier because they're qualified to do it. And you're going to be happier with them because you actually got what you needed.
I love that. When you were a young coach, who influenced you as you were coming up?
Well, I never wanted to be a coach. So I think I had great parents. My high school coaches were really good people in influencing me to be the kind of person who could have success. It was all geared toward athletics, but it all carried over into life. And they always made it that way. Don James, my college coach, was very similar. It was always life lessons and things that you learned in athletics. And but then once I became a coach, I would say that a lot of the things that I learned from Coach James, who was my first coaching job, we still do today from an organizational standpoint, from a cultural standpoint. But I've had some really good mentors, and I mentioned Bill Belichick as one of them. And technically, in terms of how you go about your business, he probably influenced me more than anybody else. But the whole culture piece of what's important in an organization, how do people have to buy into the principles and values of the organization for you to have that togetherness and teamwork that's necessary to be successful. I probably learned that more from Coach James than anybody.
So I've been watching your teams a lot over the years, and I know this. To have commitment, you have to have connection. If you want a committed team, you have to be a connected team. And this year, your team was very connected, very committed. You can tell there was something different about this team. They were playing for each other. Can you talk about, you don't have to give the secret, but what was it about this team? What made them come together in such a powerful way? And what did you learn about that this year from this team?
I think a couple of things. I think the circumstances contributed to it, where a lot of people really struggled with COVID. I think COVID made our team more together for a couple of reasons. First of all, something got taken away that they pretty much took for granted, that they were going to be able to have spring practice, summer conditioning, play a normal season. And that got taken away from them a year ago in March. And I think they learned to appreciate it more. And then when we did Zooms and we did things apart, I think they actually developed better relationships because they communicated with each other more, even though it wasn't person to person, it was more on Zoom. And I think the way we approached it, because the day that we shut down, I told the players, whoever can manage the disruptions that we're going to have is probably going to have the best chance to be successful in the end. So everybody sort of bought into that. So everybody tried to do whatever it is they had to do, regardless of the circumstance, so that the team would have a good chance to be successful. So there was a greater commitment, to that maybe than when you normally just take it for granted. I think the second part of it is we had really, really good leadership. We had some guys that, and I always think that in sports and probably in business, peer intervention, peer pressure, whatever you want to call it, probably goes a lot further to influence and behavior than, the head of the organization trying to do it. I mean, good leadership reinforces the principles and values of the organization, and it helps hold people accountable to that. And I think that was really, really good on our team. So it was a combination of those two things that I think made this team special. And it was a different group from that standpoint. Some of the teams that we've had here have, won championships, and that was a great contributor to it. Other teams were talented enough to do it. And then some teams were talented enough to do it and didn't have that and came up short. So I think those two ingredients are really, really important to have if you're going to have a chance to really do something special.
You're a 7-time national champion coach, incredible. But you've also had some failures along the way. We say we learn more from failures than success. What have you learned from some of your failures that you've experienced as a coach?
Well, I always use the term, you never want to waste a failing. because I think when you fail at something, it's a great time to, whether it's self-assess or sort of evaluate the situation that created the dysfunction, or whatever it is. Learn from it, grow from it, research it, find out a better way, and then on the other side of that, people are always more willing to change, listen, try to learn when things don't go well. That's kind of human nature. The human condition is to survive. So when things go really well, everybody expects, I sold this many cars this month. I'm supposed to run a free trip to Aruba. I'm supposed to be able to be comfortable. I'm supposed to relax, because that's really what everyone's trying to do. They're trying to reach a comfort zone. They're not really trying to say, I want to be the best that I can be at whatever it is, I'm trying to do. So it's a little bit human nature, that when you have success, it creates a little complacency. So people aren't as willing to change or even take mistakes seriously because they still got the result that they wanted. I always say the worst thing that can happen to us as a team is we play poorly and win. Because I'm going to walk in the room and have all these things that I want to get corrected or that we want to get corrected, and nobody's going to be willing to listen. They're going to be sitting there saying, man, this guy's on our ass and we won the game. I mean, what else do you want? They got the result, but they didn't necessarily do things up to the standard or the potential that they had. And you want to make those corrections, and they're not as willing to be accountable to that. When you lose or when things go poorly, or you fail at something, everybody's looking around and say, well, what could I have done better so that this would have never happened? Because they're not in a comfort zone. They didn't have success. You really want to take advantage of those situations, not necessarily in a negative way. But I always tell players, you have to have a goal and a vision for what you want to do. That's important, but you also have to have respect for the critical eye. Right? A lot of people have trouble with that. They're so sensitive to criticism, or they're so sensitive to being corrected. It's human nature that nobody really wants to acknowledge that what they were responsible for didn't go right. And I always use the example. I go speak to the Mercedes plant out here, which is the largest Mercedes plant in the world. And, they have a clothesline that runs through the assembly line. And the first time they took me on a tour there, I said, what do you guys have that clothesline running through the assembly line for? And I did notice that they had very few cars that came off the assembly line that had quality control issues. And they said, well, that's there because if anything that you're responsible for in your area of this assembly line is not going perfectly, we want you to pull the cord and we'll come and re-engineer the part or whatever it is so that we don't make multiple cars that have a flaw because this is not working properly. And I said, well, that's ingenious. What's the biggest issue with it? And they said, getting people to pull the cord. Nobody wants to acknowledge the fact that what I'm responsible for is not going well. So that's a part of human nature, but you have to overcome that and have respect for the critical eye if you're going to be able to improve, because you have to be able to self-assess, and you have to say, this is an area that I need to improve at, if you really want to be as good as you can be. And some people have a hard time with that.
That goes to ownership, right? Being able to own your performance, owning your own desire to get better.
No question. I think taking ownership is like, I always use the term, be responsible for your own self-determination. That means you're not blaming somebody else. You can have enough strength and ego to say, I made a mistake. That's my bad. How can I fix it? Let me learn from it so I can get better, rather than being defensive and look for a reason why it happened because you don't have enough strength and character or conviction to do things the right way. to be able to take that criticism.
John Madden said that winning is a great deodorant. It covers up what stinks about your team. We're talking about discomfort leading to growth. So as a leader, how do you challenge your team when they are winning, but you're not seeing the right things happen?
Well, I think because we don't talk about winning a lot, we talk about standard. Here's the standard that we're trying to establish. And you're either living up to the standard or you're not. And the scoreboard doesn't necessarily reflect that or determine that. Your individual performance, however, and self-assessing that, as well as listening to people who are evaluating it, is a very important part of that. So did we play to the standard or not? Is your behavior and what you're doing right now helping you reach the goals that you have or not? And I think, taking that approach really helps with players having a different vision. But again, it goes right back to that outcome. If everything's based on outcome, then winning is going to be fine. If everything's based on standard of excellence, then that necessarily doesn't determine that. And if you look at a season or a business cycle or a year in business or whatever, as it's the whole, okay, it's not one victory, right? It's how do we progress and continue. I guess a good analogy is you could look at climbing a mountain, and if you put the schedule of who you play, up the mountainside, you're continuing to try to climb. And the closer you get to the top, the more treacherous it gets. It's colder, it's icier, more difficult to sustain, it's harder to breathe. So you have all this adversity all of a sudden that you have to overcome. Well, if you're not prepared for that and you're always satisfied that you just won the game, then I don't know that you can ever get there.
The best leaders cascade leadership throughout the organization so that the culture is spread throughout the team, the organization. Great leaders coach their leaders. They coach their coaches. So how important is that for you as a leader to coach your coaches? So many of your coaches go on to be head coaches elsewhere. So clearly you're doing something right and something really well. So how do you coach your coaches, and how important is that for a leader to do that?
I don't think there's any question about the fact that it's really, really important, because one person cannot, you can establish the culture, but you have to have a myriad of people who carry that culture out throughout your organization. I think the military is probably, a good example of, there's some general up here that sort of says, this is how it's going to be. And then you got these captains and lieutenants and sergeants that are carrying out, this message or method to, a large group of people. And I think that's critical. And, my simple way to evaluate that is, and I say it to coaches all the time, because we have a standard and we have a culture. And, sometimes I see people allowing things to sort of slip by. And I say, well, that's not really how we want to do it. And the coach looks at me like a little funny. And I just look at him and say, if you're not coaching it, you're letting it happen.
So it's a great,
if it's not coming out the way it's supposed to be, you're letting it happen.
Love that. So let's talk about negativity. We know that negativity can sabotage a team, an organization, a company, a football program. I wrote a book called The Energy Bus, which is about energy vampires that will sabotage your team. I know that you don't allow energy vampires to sabotage your team. So how do you deal with energy vampires? What's a rule that you implement in your program to make sure negativity doesn't sabotage it?
Well, I think that, people who don't buy into the culture, people who don't buy into, the principles and values of the organization, which is what makes the culture what it is, they all have an opportunity to do it. They all have a choice to do it. And I don't think you can depend on those kind of people And if you do, and you have other people that are doing the things that you ask them to do, you're going to have divisiveness in your organization or team. I know you've heard the analogy that I used before. You got to get the right people on the bus. You got to get the wrong people off the bus. Then you got to get them in the right seats, right? Which means they're in the right role to be able to do the things that you want them to do to help the organization. So, look, this is not for everybody. And I really tell players that. There's high expectation. We have a high expectation to our standard and what you have to do to commit yourself to the standard and the work that you have to do to be able to get to the standard. And if you're not willing to commit to those things, then this is it's not for you. I use the term sometimes, everybody can't play for the Yankees. There's a high expectation. You got a high standard. Everybody expects them to win all the time. And that's challenging for everybody in the organization, but everybody's got to buy into the standard and the principles and values that you have in the organization and the standard that you have an expectation that everybody reaches. And that's not necessarily the outcome, right? Which is what everybody starts to think about. How much money did we make? How many cars did we sell? How many games did we win? Not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the internal things that help you do those things to the level that you'd like to achieve.
Talk about standard when Alabama doesn't win a championship or has a down year. The pundits and the critics come out and they start saying, "Oh, Nick Saban's teams are no longer great, and maybe he's lost his edge." And I always laugh when I see that because I'm like, you don't know Nick Saban. Like, he's coming back and he's going to build a great team again. You keep going, keep building great teams. So I just have to ask you, like, what drives you to continue to build such great teams and to be such a great coach?
Well, I think you really have to understand, first of all, that success is not a continuum. It's momentary. So just because you had success last year doesn't mean you're going to have success next year. And I think you see that in business all the time. People who reach these great plateaus, they really struggle to do the same thing the next year. And I think that they don't understand success. They're satisfied, they're complacent. Because they had success. Complacency breeds a blatant disregard for doing what's right, which goes back to these principles and values that helped us get there. All of a sudden, they aren't that important anymore. So we don't have to do the things that we did to help us be successful. But even greater than that, you have to say, even though we had success, we still had failings along the way. And there's things that we need to get fixed, and there's things that we can make better in our organization. So how are we going to improve? So you're constantly, trying to build. And the way I personally do it is I say every year is like I just took a new job, right? Mm-hmm. So regardless of how we did last year, it's like I just took the job at UCLA or Southern Cal or University of Alaska. It doesn't matter, right? And I'm going to start all over. And rework, the whole organization, not assume that the players in the organization, because everybody's role changes. 25% of our team changes every year. So the guys that were leaders last year, they're not here anymore. So who's going to be the next leaders? You're going to have people who have to step up and fill in positions that are going to be different. The strengths of the players that you have are going to be different. So you got to figure out, how is this team going to win? The team that we have last year is different than the team that we have this coming year. So how is this team going to win? We won here running the ball when Derrick Henry was a tailback, and and then we won it throwing it because we had really good receivers. So how is this team going to win? I mean, very challenging when you look at it from that standpoint to just, continue. And I don't think anybody likes to lose. I know I don't like to lose. And if you don't pay attention to these details, all you've done is create a target for yourself when you have success. So everybody's saying, well, how they do it, right? And we want to beat them. And if we beat them, we've arrived. So it's even more challenging to stay on top of your game because you're going to get everybody else's best game. So you got to be flexible. You got to have a good plan, but you also have to constantly evaluate that plan. And like I have a lot of one-on-one meetings with people in the organization trying to get them to understand what their role needs to be.
That's so good. A lot of small businesses right now are struggling. There's a lot of negativity in the news. You're really good at helping your team tune out the negativity that's out there. So can you give us advice in terms of if we are a small business, if we're hearing all the negative attention in the media, how do we overcome that? How do we stay focused on what matters most?
Well, first of all, in my opinion, and this is not to disrespect anybody, but you have to sort of shut out the outside noise. Okay, so, and it's very challenging now because you have internet, Twitter, Facebook, 101 news people out there that all have to figure out something to talk about. So there's always a controversy. There's always somebody picking one side and picking the other. But the fact of the matter is none of that really matters internally in your organization. And it doesn't really help, if you know what you need to do in your business to make your business work, and you look at it in a very, I'm going to use the word again, process-oriented way, and not be influenced by external factors, I call them. People outside who have an opinion, who may not even have all the facts, then you'll have a better chance probably to function the best possible way you can function based on the circumstance in the hand that you're dealt. So don't always get good cards, but good card players always can play the hand that he's dealt. And I don't think you can listen to what everybody else thinks and be able to do that. We have that issue with players all the time. They listen to what everybody else thinks. Other people create expectations for them, which creates anxiety, which doesn't really help them focus on what they need to focus on to improve. And I'm constantly trying to shut off the outside noise, the external factors, just distractions. The scoreboard's a distraction. Should you play differently when you're ahead 14 points or behind 14 points? That's an external factor. Should you play differently when you're playing a good player or against a not so good player? If the standard of what you do is relative to you, and I tell players all the time, when I was in the NFL, they did a cut-up of you. I was just watching you. I didn't really know who you were playing against. I didn't know what the score of the game was when I was watching you. So why would you make that external factor affect your performance? And it's the same kind of thing when you talk about business and what everybody's talking about and all these external factors that really are not determining factors as to whether you're going to be successful or not.
That's such great advice. For a final question, for small business owners or business owners in general, or CEOs, leaders, what could they do to win this year? We're talking about 2021. 2020 has been a tough year. You know how to come off of tough years and have winning seasons. How can people build winners this year?
I'd say stay focused on, do great quality control in your company in all areas, and be flexible and changes that you have to make to not change the culture, but change the things that you do internally that may help you be more successful. Don't be afraid to make changes that need to get made. Be aggressive in how you sort of analyze and evaluate all these things. And, the thing that I hate most is when somebody says, that's the way we've always done it. It just blows my mind, right? you're not having success, and you analyze it and you think you're not having success, and nobody wants to change because that's always the way we've done it. There's an old saying, if you do things like you've always done it, you'll get the same results that you always got. So they could be good or they could be bad, but if they're bad and you want to be good, you better be willing to change. So I would stay focused and be disciplined on your process, and make sure that people in your organization are committed to executing that, and be flexible and make changes that you need to make if things aren't going the way, because things change all the time. Nothing goes in a straight line. The stock market doesn't always go up. Oil prices don't always go up. All right. So everything changes. Nothing goes in a straight line all the time. So, interest rates, they go up and down. So you have to be able to adjust and adapt with all those things, relatively speaking, and you have to expect that it's going to happen that way.
That's such a great point, because you innovated and adapted as a football coach. Your offense is different than it was years ago, and you've been willing to do what it takes to succeed in today's game, right? So I think you're a great example of innovation and adaptation.
And it's based on the circumstances. It's based on, the people you have in the organization. Sometimes it's based on the circumstances of how things change. And what's going to be the next best way to take advantage of those changes.
Nick Saban, thank you so much for joining us. I learned a ton today, and I really appreciate making the time to educate us, inspire us, and equip us as leaders, business owners, and people who want to make a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. You all have a blessed day. All right. See you later.
And I want to thank our sponsors for making this possible, and also you, the viewer, for watching. We appreciate you. Please join us May 12th for my next guest, Josh Lichtner. He's an incredible innovation expert, and he talks about how to innovate your way to growth and success. We'll see you there.